朋友们，大家好。近日，谷歌前 CEO 埃里克·施密特接受美国媒体采访，谈到了中美 AI 竞争。近年来，人工智能技术的快速发展，不仅对全球科技格局产生深远影响，也引发了国际竞争的激烈化。这里所谓国际竞争，正如施密特所说，指的就是中美之间的竞争。别的国家根本玩不了这个，资金、人才、能源、国家意志和政策，长远来看还要有项目支撑，要能落地，要能实际应用。除了中美，谁能玩得起？美国在人工智能领域长期处于全球领先地位，其技术创新的主要来源是高度活跃的私营企业、丰富的科研资源以及国际化的人才体系。然而，中国近年来在这一领域的快速追赶，引发了美国的警觉。施密特提到，中国正在加倍发力，这与中国政府对人工智能的高度重视和持续投入密切相关。从发布中国人工智能发展规划到制定数据使用和算法开发的政策，中国已经建立了一套系统化的发展战略。正如访谈中所指出的，中美人工智能竞赛不仅是一场技术较量，更是一场对资源、人才和政策协调能力的全面竞争。而人工智能科学家和通用人工智能的概念，清楚地表明这一技术的潜力不仅能够推动现有科学技术的加速发展，还可能催生新的科学发现和技术革命。所以施密特说，这是一场美国必须要赢的竞赛。其实这算是委婉的说法了，这场竞赛根本就是一场你死我活的竞赛。
It looks to me, and I'll say this very directly, this is a race between the US and China. Both countries have a willingness, a goal, a national policy. They have the capital, they have the energy, and they have the people at scale that almost no other country has. That fight is the epic fight. As you know, in the US, we've been trying to slow China down a bit. It's been somewhat successful, but not hugely successful. And China is doubling down. They've recently now brought out models that are analogous or similar to the best models in America, which was shocking to me. The competition is important because as you get closer and closer to general intelligence, you can build your own AI scientists. And if you add more, you have human scientists and AI scientists, you can supercharge and get there so much faster.
Okay, I want to talk a little bit about what's perceived by many as a sort of AI arms race with China and separate some of the hype from reality here. Can you help us understand, because I think there was a period at which everyone thought we need to accelerate because China's accelerating, and then we saw the initial Gen AI models coming from US companies. As you've noted more recently, there are at least 3 Chinese companies that have come out with Gen 2 GPT-4 models. Why should we be worried about this? I mean, isn't there an argument looking back at the Cold War that 2 big powers racing to develop technology, for example, space era technology, what helped us put, Sputnik and then a person on the moon, was actually productive for technological progress. So why should we be worried about this?
Well, one of the things that's different is that because this is intelligence and because it occurs quickly, you can end up with monopolies for a while. So I'll give you an example. We, America, actually invent this technology. We have all these AI scientists, which are just computer programs. We unleash them. We were doing pretty well. We're going like this, and now all of a sudden we're going like this. At that point, China says, oh my God, they got there and they accelerate there, but they're behind. There is a period of time in the race where one of the 2 protagonists has essentially monopoly control over intelligence that's stronger than humans. So what would intelligence stronger than humans could? Can you hear me?
You're back. Thank you.
So sorry. The important thing is that in this cycle, right? When whoever is ahead can discover attacks on its opponent as well as benefits to itself. And those benefits can be very profound and are hard to characterize. So imagine a situation where, and these are thought experiments, where you have a system that uses physics and chemistry and material science and math to discover a whole new world of facts, a whole new world of weapons, a whole new world of science, a whole new world of biology. We just don't know. Now, this is speculation, but the consensus in my industry is that this is a race that we have to win. And in order to win, we need all the good things that America is doing. We have a shortage of energy, which you've already noted. We need more visas for foreign workers and a bunch of things like that.
So what are China's advantages over the US? You mentioned a few things the US might need, but in what way do you think Chinese companies might be advantaged in this race?
They're more focused on winning. They're more centrally controlled, and this is a case where central control can help. They're willing to spend an enormous amount of money without a particular goal. They have a tradition of very fast consumer, essentially corporate adoption that is within their firms. And I think there's every reason to believe that even if we win the first part of the race, China will eventually win the race because they adopt this sort of technology more quickly in volume products. A good example is that I spent 20 years working on various robotic solutions. And there are a number of companies that are very, very interesting that are going to build AI robot brains. All of them use inexpensive robots from China who are just as powerful, or which are just as powerful as the American ones, but much less expensive, much more flexible. So the China manufacturing might, which is without question, take a look at their dominance in batteries and solar and so forth, and cars now, could enable them to do real world things with AI that we could only dream of. China has a lot of energy, and they seem to be willing to, they don't seem to have any particular rules about data, human data, medical data, and so forth. The problem that they've had has been lack of hardware. We, America, have restricted the access to what are technically known as A100 level chips. This is the previous generation or two generations of NVIDIA chips. But it sure looks to us that China has found ways around those sanctions, which is not a surprise. And they've also learned how to do things with fewer chips, which is to their credit and shows you how good engineers they really are.
施密特感叹中国有很多优势，除了他提到的这些，我觉得还有很重要的将决定成败的一点是关于人工智能的发展方向。美国的是通用模型倾向，美国的 AI 巨头如 OpenAI、谷歌、Meta 等等，倾向于开发通用型大模型。这些模型目标是实现拟人化的智能，能够解决多种任务，展现出科幻电影般的智慧。例如 ChatGPT 和谷歌 Bard 可以进行自然语言对话、创作和编程。但通用模型的发展也存在局限性，它们需要庞大的训练数据和算力投入，在实际应用中可能存在场景不匹配的问题，即难以直接落地到特定行业。而中国的发展方向不一样，重点发展的是行业专属模型。中国的许多 AI 项目更注重垂直领域的实际应用，例如基于医疗、工业制造、金融、农业等行业开发的专属模型。这些模型针对性强，能在相对有限的数据和算力条件下实现高效实用的解决方案。行业专属模型的优点在于更贴近市场需求，可以直接推动产业升级和商业化应用，回报周期更短，风险更可控。所以从未来的发展来看，两国可能会呈现这样的趋势：美国会继续在前沿领域保持领先，但同时关注在商业化上的改进。中国则通过行业专属模型快速实现技术落地，同时提升在基础研究方面的投入，突破西方的封锁，在芯片等硬件开发上缩小与美国的核心技术差距。
And so China is now pursuing, I think, what you've characterized as the equivalent of the CHIPS and Science Act, which was passed here under the past Congress and the Biden administration to sort of shore up our own production of chips in collaboration with Taiwan, of course, and others. But you've argued that China has an industrial policy around chip production that far surpasses ours. So is that part of the solution here, that the U.S. needs a more aggressive industrial policy around chips, or is this about trade? What's the solution?
Well, so the situation we find ourselves in is that these chips that we care about are all largely made in Taiwan through a company called TSMC, using technology that's proprietary and a monopoly by a company called ASML in Europe. So the government has made it very difficult for that technology to get to China, which was a good decision. China has its own leaders in this area. One is called SMIC, and they're stuck at essentially what is called 7 nanometers, lower is better, and the technology that we use is 3 nanometers, again, lower is better. So one possible scenario is that our hardware will just get better and we'll be saved by that. But even if that were to occur, which I'm skeptical about, China makes essentially all of the pieces that are necessary to make semiconductors. I'm not talking about the chips, I'm talking about the glue and the carriers and so forth. So as a matter of national security, a number of us wanted very much the CHIPS Act to anticipate that. So if you anticipate conflict with China, which seems like where the government is, and it sounds like where the Chinese are, then you better figure out a way to have separate supply chains. Today, the supply chains are completely intermixed. China is very dependent on us. We're very dependent on that. That's got to get addressed somehow.
Our economies are so interlinked, US and China, and I understand your antagonistic scenario that you're raising, but there are others who would argue that our economies are so intertwined that there's unlikely to be an all-out conflict. There might be a conflict in the Straits of Taiwan over the TSMC and so forth, as you've mentioned. But is there a reason to be concerned? What's the argument for AI and AI progress to be largely dominated by democracies versus authoritarian regimes? You sort of made an argument that the central control actually helps advance the technology. But from the point of view of public benefits from this technology, what is the argument for democracy over authoritarian control over this tech?
Well, democracies are to some degree threatened by AI because democracies run on information resources, and AI is a very good misinformation source. As you know, China has solved these problems by not allowing them. So if you're a well-run autocracy, whatever that means, the first thing you would do is make sure that you don't have misinformation that could harm the regime, which is precisely what China and others have done. My personal view is quite different from the rhetoric that you hear out of Washington. My own view is that while it is absolutely true that China is developing a modern army, they're building more nuclear weapons and so forth, they are unlike Russia. They have their consensus built at a certain level, and they have concluded right now that they're too weak to go into a direct confrontation with the United States. This is my personal opinion. If you, having just recently been there, if you look at the deflation problems, there's a problem called lying down where people are not working very hard. They have a demographic challenge that's very serious. They have a credit bubble. All the things that you read about in the press are true. This is not a good time to be starting a major conflict. And whenever I'm in Beijing, I always imagine, there are all these tall buildings. There must be a building with about 1,000 people who are charged with exactly one question. If we were to cross some line with respect to Taiwan, what would the US do? And in particular, what would they do if they remove the dollar from our trading currencies? China is incredibly dependent upon the dollar as a trading regime. And until they can sort that out, which I'm sure they're working on, I think we're going to be okay. My own view of China is that we're going to have a lot of tension because they're going to push really hard. It's their nature and culture. But we shouldn't overreact beyond responding directly to what they're doing.